You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. You can hear the show live Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN and streaming at accesswdun.com. You can find all things Martha Zoller at marthazoller.com. Welcome to the Martha Zoller Show. It is always great to have you here with us. And joining me right now to talk about the number one industry in Georgia, which is agriculture, is Drew Echols from J. Moore Farms. And Drew, I appreciate very much you being with us today. Good morning.
Good morning, Martha. How are you doing today?
Good. Now, I know you went to D.C. recently to lobby on behalf of agriculture. Tell us what you learned there and, what do we need to be looking at over the next couple of years related to agriculture?
Well, that was, I know you and I have been talking about coming on the show for a week or so, and I mentioned to you that I was going to D.C. earlier this week, and you said, why don't we just schedule this for when you get back. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I actually flew up with Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, and I'm the president of that organization statewide. We have a board. We have an executive director, much like a lot of other, industry trade associations in the state and across the country. But we were actually went up as members of the International Fresh Produce Association. So this organization merged two entities last year and created this International Fresh. And it's a huge conglomerate. I mean, I know and I appreciate all of our local customers who know who J. Moore Farms is, but when you get outside of Northeast Georgia, sometimes it's hard to find somebody that knows J. Moore. But this organization is actually full of, the Del Montes and the Green Giants and all the big Driscolls and all the big farmers from all over the country and even all over the world. So there was a lot of policy talk being done.
So what are the biggest challenges that you guys are facing right now? I mean, obviously you have the normal ones, weather and all of that kind of stuff, but there's a lot going on in the world that's impacting supply. So how is that impacting you?
Well, so, a lot of the things we were talking about at the forefront of all of our discussions was definitely labor. And that's always the case. And our needs, what's really strange, and a lot of people don't understand this, but our needs here in the southeastern United States is just much different from that of California and Arizona and New Mexico. And there's a lot of produce grown out there. So, there's a lot of illegal immigrants out there. I mean, there's a lot out here, but there's a lot out there, and they work on those farms. Those farms and those state governments are a little bit more friendly to the illegals working on those farms. So, that's always, it's funny, that you got strawberry and peach growers in the southeastern United States butting heads with the same growers out in California. You would think that we would get along over everything, but really it's two different worlds when we start talking about the West Coast. And, obviously, I mean, we could spend our whole segment talking about that, but the biggest thing right now is this inflation. And we started seeing this really about this time last year. We saw all kind of supply chain issues coming, going through COVID and coming out of COVID and this and that. But we started seeing a lot of really steep price increases on input cost, on fertilizers, fuel, equipment, just everything going up about this time last year. And, you always hear, what are they talking? I mean, I'm not an economist. What are they saying? Like 9 or 10% inflation? Is that the number we're hearing?
Well,
now?
It's up about 8.5, and it could go higher from there. Yes.
So a lot of these input costs, especially fertilizer, is up, 60, 70, 80%. And in some cases, on some special blends, it's double. Well, the truth of the matter is a flat of strawberries or peaches or whatever that we're growing up here at J. Moore. I mean, we're not getting that whole entire bit back, that all of that 60% back. I mean, there's just so much that people are going to pay for fresh produce, and that's unfortunate. I mean, you're having to eat a lot of these costs, and it's really, really cutting into margins. And, you know, with farming, it's not that the guys are out here, you know, you have good years and you have bad years, and farmers are not, when it's good, it's pretty good, but then you have bad years. So, you know, I think in farming, especially somebody in their mid-40s like myself, you have to look at your whole career. If you look at it year to year, you'll drive yourself crazy. So, you know, you're always putting back for a bad year. And when it's good, you sort of do have to take advantage of it, but it is not cake and roses right now.
And, you know, but people still have to eat. I mean, you still have to buy groceries. You've got to do that. I think that in some ways, people probably are making changes in what they're buying, but you've still got to go to the grocery store every week. You've still got to go and get what you need. I think where you're going to see some other problems are going to be in other parts of the businesses. And so it'll be interesting to see. Now, when is the ag bill coming back up again? That comes up every 5 years, right?
Yes, ma'am. And that was the main topic of discussion. That's going to be next year, and you can only imagine right now you have every segment of the industry right now is just really, really jockeying to get their needs and their funding put into that bill. You know, for your listeners, I really do. I'm going to say this one more time. I appreciate being able to be here and tell the story of agriculture. But, you know, well over half of that farm bill is full of, you know, free and reduced lunch for school kids. It's also has a lot of the WIC programs built into it. So it's not just farm programs. It's not just conservation use programs. It's both. So, you know, that's the first thing that voters and citizens and taxpayers need to understand, that it's not just a huge package that's all this free money for farms. But you do have, you know, you have the poultry industry and its wants and needs, and then you have fruits and vegetables, and you have cattle and hay and all the row crops. So everybody's jockeying right now. Probably the biggest ask for the fruit and vegetable industry right now is some help with the trade deal that we made with Mexico a few years ago. We're getting a lot of produce dumped here, really, really cheap. And as you know, I mean, you report on it daily. The border crisis is, I mean, it's a joke, really. And there's drugs, there's fentanyl, there's marijuana, there's methamphetamine. All this stuff is coming in, either getting smuggled in, you know, across the border by foot, or they hide it in produce trucks a whole lot. And so it really doesn't matter if the tomatoes are only $5 a box. Who cares if the fentanyl on the truck's worth $10 million? They can give the tomatoes away. So that it's just really, really unfair what's happening, and we desperately have to close that border down, tighten that border up, and I think that's even going to help with our trade issues with Mexico.
Well, and getting back to the ag bill, what I think is really interesting is they put all that other stuff in there because they say that's how they get the urban votes. They get the, you know, the people that live in the cities, the congressmen that live in the cities, but everybody's got to eat. Everybody, it doesn't matter whether you live in a city in a high rise or you live out on a farm. Everybody's got to get their food from somewhere. And I think that what's really important about what you do, Drew, is that you bring light to the fact, where does food come from? I mean, back in the old days, before there was money, how people traded was by trading agriculture products. That was like money because everybody had to have them. Then money came about and you had this whole way that things were done over tens of thousands of years. But it is just amazing to me that you say you've got to encourage people that live in urban areas to vote for the ag bill. So you got to put something in there that they can relate to, but I don't understand why people can't relate to the fact that agriculture needs to be successful, not only in America, but around the world, because it is the one thing you can't do without.
That's right. And, I think our society, we are so productive and really we get a lot done. And the reason we're able to do that is, the doctors, they don't have to go home unless they want to, they don't have to go home and milk cows or take care of the cows. The factory workers, they don't have to go pick up eggs after they get done with the factory. We have streamlined society now to where, less than 1% of our population feeds this country. And that's perfectly, that is a great, situation. We just need to make sure that 1% is healthy and sustainable. And those programs that are built into this farm bill, in the grand scheme, I've had to have a lot of people explain a lot of this to me, especially early on in my career. I mean, yes, sure, there's conservation programs, sure, there's safety net programs, but what those things are all about ultimately is keeping food and fiber costs down for consumers. Maybe a farm gets some help with an irrigation project or something like that, but it drives down the price of food overall, keeps our prices lower, the industry prices lower. So, and I, as a Republican, I hate to talk about that, but it really does. It is for the greater good, and we do have the most abundant, safest, cheapest food supply in the whole entire world.
Absolutely.
Are there problems with Farm Bill? Absolutely. Are there farms that take advantage of some of the systems, some of the programs? Absolutely. But by and large, it works, and it's a good thing for the American people and Georgians.
Drew Echols, J. Moore Farms, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, ma'am, Martha. I appreciate it.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Matt Brown's joining me, as he always does, from the Washington Post. He's covering Georgia on Fridays. And, he covers Georgia every day, but he talks to me on Fridays. But, Matt, this is the big issue, I think, for the election is the economy. And, I know that there are groups trying to poke through with different issues all over the place, but I just think at the end of the day, and I hate using that phrase, as you know, it's going to be the economy.
Right, definitely. So, yeah, I think that it goes without saying that people's material conditions and how are they going to put food on the table and actually feed their families and support themselves is going to be just the root essential thing that folks are going to always be thinking about when it comes to an election. At the same time, it is important to note that there is a lot of cultural debates going on in this country at the moment. There's a lot of questions around what does the economy mean for people? Does it mean inflation? Does it mean social inequality? Does it mean do I have protections from work and everything? Do I have proper health care and stuff? So, but yes, that is going to be and is always really what a lot of elections come down to, especially when the economy is not doing as well as we've seen in the past couple of weeks here.
So this week, Glenn Kessler, who I've had on the program a number of times, he's called the fact checker at the Washington Post, wrote an article called Stacey Abrams' Rhetorical Twist on Being an Election Denier. This article is causing reverberations, not just in Georgia, but around the country, because there did seem to be this different carve-out for Stacey Abrams and the rhetoric that she had related to her last election. But it seems like Glenn isn't buying it anymore.
Right, definitely. I think that the money paragraph from Glenn's very good piece that I think everyone should check out is that he says, quote, Abrams played up claims the election was stolen until such tactics became untenable for anyone who claims to be an advocate for American democratic norms and values. And I think that really just gets at it, where Stacey Abrams, in a lot of ways since 2018, has pointed out, there was this issue with the election system. And I was frustrated by this thing that Brian Kemp did. So I think that I'm the legitimate winner, or that Brian Kemp's only the quote-unquote legal winner of the election as opposed to the true winner. And that since 2020, when the questions over the validity of elections have obviously become a lot more in question and under contest, as Donald Trump has launched his own campaign claiming that he actually won that election when he didn't. This has become a very bad look for Stacey Abrams, and it's something that she has not been able to really square the full hole on, just earlier this month as well, when she was talking to, myself and others at the Washington Post, when we were going and asking candidates if they would concede the election. They said yes, but that also they were going to have a serious caveat to that they were going to make sure that every single vote was counted. So a bit of a hedge that that they will accept the official outcome of the election, but that they're not going to necessarily accept that until they make sure that every avenue that they can possibly make sure that people's votes are counted have been exhausted. And I think that just shows a tension in Abrams' message here, that she's a champion for democracy at the same time that she does have some genuine distrust of the democratic system in Georgia.
Well, and again, as Glenn pointed out, there's really no data to back up what she's saying. And that's what has finally come in full circle as far as everything that's happening. So, look, I think it's going to be a very interesting election, and I do think that Brian Kemp continues to do well, although he had a little bit of a blip last night related to the Rivian deal, which I don't know that moves that many voters, but it's been the first bad news he's had in weeks. Okay, and I mean, it's been weeks since the governor has had a bad headline.
Right, definitely. The Rivian case is interesting because it takes on the question of can Kemp really cut through NIMBYism and everything, and is he able to actually bring these businesses through the model that he's put through, and can he be the pro-business governor that he's said? As you said, I don't know that the Rivian case is going to be the thing that moves thousands and thousands of voters in Georgia, but you only need to move a couple thousand voters for it to be a nightmare situation in this polarized of a state.
So let's talk about the Senate race a little bit, and I want you to tell me if you think I'm totally off base. I feel like a couple of weeks ago that the Warnock campaign was kind of in the place where they were overplaying the negative hand. And even though it wasn't all Senator Warnock ads, the average person doesn't know the difference between a PAC ad and a campaign ad. If it's an anti-Herschel Walker ad, they think it's coming from Warnock. And I think he had overplayed it a bit. But I think that the Herschel Walker non-answering of it has sort of put the ball back in Senator Warnock's court. And we've seen it in polling that while it's still too close to call, it's moving around a little bit.
No, I think that's definitely been the case. And some of that is always just the sort of people coming home after Labor Day to the parties that they usually vote for in polls and everything. But there has been serious movement here. As you said, Walker's campaign has gotten a lot more disciplined over the past couple of weeks about what message they're going to put out for their candidate, how they're actually going to respond to some of the attacks that Warnock's putting on and some of the scandals that Walker has experienced. And also, yes, like Warnock and many Democratic-aligned groups across the state and country have gone live in Georgia for weeks now with attacks on Walker for, his past, his stances on abortion, his comments, his past with his ex-wife, for instance, and all these things. And those are stories that voters will have to grapple with. But when it's every other ad on television and every single ad you get on YouTube, people can get a little desensitized to it, where they say, yes, I know that he had children that he didn't disclose previously, or I saw the ad with his ex-wife, but what does that mean anymore? What more you got for me, And that is, I think, the thing that Warnock's team is having to grapple with at the moment, where they say, did we actually define him with all of that, or is now the good old son of Georgia image that Herschel has always had really coming back after you were able to throw all this mud at him?
And Matt, I got to tell you one thing that's really funny, because I think the Warnock campaign has too much money, because when I log on to Words with Friends and I get a Raphael Warnock commercial, it makes me mad. When I log on to my workout video on YouTube and I get political commercials of any time, it makes me mad. I understand people have got to monetize things, but it's like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere and you can't get away from them.
Right. No, and that's the state of living in a battleground state at this point, especially when, as Walker's fundraising emails will always point out, Warnock is one of the highest fundraisers in the country for Democrats. He doesn't need to have other Senate PACs come in for him, because so many Democratic donors from all across the country, small dollar donors, large dollar donors, are all interested in giving to him and his campaign. You can see how that can potentially backfire sometimes. Like, I'm thinking of 2020 right now, though, when, for instance, when Chuck Schumer went all in and his organizations went all in on funding the campaign to defeat Susan Collins in Maine, for instance. And that actually turned out to be a blowout for Collins, basically, in that year, when everyone thought that she was totally a goner. And when you interviewed voters after the fact, voters said, I just didn't believe these ads after a while. I was totally oversaturated with hearing how Susan Collins is the most terrible person in Washington, and I just started tuning them out and stopped believing them. And I think that there is always a risk in campaigns of you potentially overplaying your hand here, and that's something the Warnock campaign has to be very, very conscious of as we head into the last 4 weeks of this campaign or so.
So what are you working on right now?
I am taking a serious look at the voter mobilization strategies for all of these campaigns and everything, as well as how different voting rights organizations across the state are mobilizing actors and whatnot, and how, like Kelly Loeffler, for instance, has like a voting rights and election security group that's going across the state and everything. So as people are really ramping up into October, you're seeing a lot of folks are also still engaged in persuasion, but I've been following around candidates and organizations all through Georgia this week, actually, and really just engaging with them on how are they making sure that folks are actually even getting out. And that's what this is, as we're getting down to the wire here, what it's turning into. Another part of that I was paying attention to that was interesting when I was at the state election board meeting earlier this week is these questions over voter challenges. And because of some of the reforms that happened in the Georgia Election Integrity Act of last year, you've now been able to see it so that just basically any person can come and challenge any number of votes that they believe might be illegitimate or improperly registered. And that has been, a major issue in Gwinnett County. We're going to see on Monday that election board is going to engage with those issues again. It's been a major issue in a lot of other counties around the state and even the country with some of these new laws. So the question of voter purges and challenges to voter registration is something that I'm also keeping an eye on as we really get down to the wire and say, all right, who's voting in this election right now? What does this electorate look like?
October 11th is the last day that people can register to vote. Early voting will start on the 17th, I believe, and we are going to be running from now until Election Day. Matt Brown from the Washington Post, you can follow him on social media. You can also follow all the things that he writes, and we appreciate you checking in with us every week. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Bill Crane is joining me right now for Crane's Corner. And Bill, we have this announcement that happened today, and I know we usually only talk Georgia politics, but this announcement today that we're going to have 125,000 refugees this year that we're going to allow. Now, in light of the fact that the administration is in denial that we're having about 250,000 a month coming over the border, it just seems like the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing, or the right hand does not acknowledge what is going on in the left hand.
Immigration reform is one of those issues that has been sort of on the docket, really, for the better part of 35 years. The last major congressional action was in 1986, the Immigration Reform Act of 1986, which took the number of aggregate legal immigrants in the nation to 1 million, and had this kind of wackadoo formula on which countries get which. And we really haven't abided by that, and we've used executive action on the part of both parties to waive those numbers and set them aside for political refugees, for natural disasters. And the only kind of upside to it right now is we still have a labor shortage, particularly on the frontline jobs that a lot of people no longer in America want to do. And we need help, whether we're talking about agriculture, picking fruit, or helping hotels get their rooms turned for the next set of guests. But we do have to have secure borders, and we have to have a system in place that makes it particularly worthwhile for those who obey and follow the rules to become naturalized U.S. citizens. And so it's a ball that keeps getting punted down the field. Democrats, when they're in charge, tend to want to open the borders and bring people in with the assumption that they're going to convert them to voters at some point. Doesn't always happen. Republicans, depending on which part of the country, if you're a border state, view things a little bit differently. But Florida has, a multitude of immigrants coming in across, a variety of channels, and people that have been there their entire lives who are exiled from Cuba, and they're not a captive of either party. So kind of the conventional wisdom that Latinx, and we're just coming off Latin Heritage Month, vote monolithically is untrue. And the Republican Party in particular is making some pretty significant inroads there in places like Florida and Texas. And
well, Mayra Flores, who's the new congresswoman who was elected in a special election, and then she is going to be on she's got to run again in November because it was a special election. The Republican woman, born in Mexico, naturalized citizen, first time that's ever happened. She had a town hall the other night where basically these looked like regular folks that were just saying, you know, we've always been conservative. We've always, you know, been working class kind of people, and that we got ignored by the Democratic Party, and so now we're voting Republican. And I think what's interesting about it is I love the fact that votes are up for grabs. I think that you ought to fight for different votes. But what's interesting about this whole labor thing is that with this, the bottom line of this, whatever the numbers are, 2.5 million for this year, whatever it's going to be, you can't absorb that number of people. Yes, there's a labor shortage, but those folks aren't going to immediately assimilate and start taking jobs. It's going to take time to get them there. I was in Lexington, South Carolina for a funeral a couple of days ago, and we tried to get lunch. And you're right about the labor shortage. We went to 3 different restaurants that said, I'm sorry, we're 45 minutes behind because we're short-staffed in the kitchen and in the wait staff. And that's in a fairly small town in a state that's doing really well. So it's a very interesting time right now.
Well, I would also add that you've got people that have been here multiple generations who don't even refer to themselves anymore as Mexican Americans or Cuban Americans. They just call themselves Americans. And I live in DeKalb County. And pretty much in any direction you look from my house, you'll see a Stacey Abrams sign. I'm not criticizing that. It just happens to be the reality. But there is a very prosperous man who lives down the street. I won't call his name out, who has been rehabbing and flipping homes for 10 or 20 years. I've been in this neighborhood for 15 years. And he has 2 homes next to each other on the corner. He's got his mother in one of them. He is Mexican-American heritage. And there are 2 Kemp signs in those front yards. So I see, as you do, at ground level, people who come here from another country who succeed, who kind of bootstrap their way up, and who want basically the opportunity to succeed, particularly working middle class, Latinx voters who are probably Catholic, are migrating towards the GOP. It may not be all of that in polling data yet because those databases aren't as good and pollsters often are not bilingual, but it's definitely occurring.
Well, and I think that also we have now the campaign is ramping up. Governor Kemp has had a lot of big-name people come in, most notably Governor Glenn Youngkin from Virginia. There have been a lot of things happening. Stacey Abrams' campaign, I guess she's doing the same things, but it doesn't seem she's getting the coverage. And again, she's in trouble, kind of like I think it was 2012 when Hurricane Sandy happened. Then all of a sudden, all the focus was on President Obama, and Romney was kind of out of the news. Now, granted, that's presidential level, but right now, Ron DeSantis is getting a lot of news. Governor Kemp's getting a lot of news because he's preparing for this hurricane and the rain that's coming in, and it makes it more difficult for their challengers to get airtime.
My column this week on accesswdun.com talks about how we're in the final stretch, which we are. We're less than a month away from the general, or just under a month away from the general election, which will be the first Tuesday or second Tuesday in November. We'll have early voting starting in about 3 weeks. And what you have seen over the last 2 months is a pattern settle in both the Senate race and the governor's race. In the last 7 polls taken by credible national polling organizations, Governor Kemp has led his race by from 2 to 11 percentage points, with the average being 6 percentage points, which is outside the margin of error. But more importantly, in all of those polls, he is over 50% unless you subtract out the margin of error. And what's really critical is the undecideds in all of those polls are all in single digits, with the highest being 8%. So if you're above 50% and your opponent has 40 or 41%, and the undecideds are 8, you've got to pick up all of those undecideds, the 1% of the libertarian vote, to win. And the undecideds will split. They won't necessarily split in favor of the incumbent. They typically don't, but they will split. They won't all go in one camp. So There's a path for Stacey Abrams still, probably through the debates. There's a possibility, obviously, of something that could happen, the old October surprise. But Governor Kemp, to me, looks very safe for re-election and potentially in double digits. And Herschel Walker bested Raphael Warnock in those same 7 polls, 3 out of the 7, with Senator Warnock winning 4 out of the 7. But the margin was closer. And Senator Warnock is outpolling Stacey Abrams on a percent basis in all of those polls. So what's settling in is one race looks like it's settled, the other may be in a runoff or be a Walker victory. But voters don't jump from one column to another in the last 30 days typically, and the patterns have been setting in part because there's been so much of an assault on the airwaves. You and I have talked about this before, some of which I believe is backfiring. And people have been seeing ads, since June. And you'll now start to see the down-ticket races form, but the other thing that's happening there, if you're a Republican, is you're going to be benefiting from some pretty long coattails from the top of the ticket.
Well, and Senator Warnock is, he insists upon in his official account for his Senate office, he calls himself Senator Reverend Warnock, okay? He wants everyone to know he's a reverend. And I know that all these attack ads against Herschel Walker are not from his campaign, but people don't understand that. They associate all of them with Senator Warnock. I think he's gone a bit too far, and it just is unseemly for somebody who's a reverend to be going after somebody about past attacks, as horrible as they are. I think in a way Herschel is kind of presenting himself as the sunshine and puppies person because he doesn't have as much money.
If I were Warnock, I'd be running the puppy ads from the first campaign again. Yeah. I was at an event night before last in Atlanta, and it was a restaurant, and they had the large flat screens, as have become almost ubiquitous in restaurants these days. And I was there for about 90 minutes, and I wasn't watching the TVs, but obviously they were in the background. And about 6 times in less than an hour, I saw the Herschel Walker ad with his ex-wife Cindy with the close-ups that, clearly by their ages and faces was taken decades ago. Now, if they had former wife Cindy Walker today making some allegations about Herschel Walker's conduct or saying that there was a continuing problem, I think there'd be an issue there. But it's an interview that actually was from Dateline more than a decade ago, somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago. I believe the book was released in 2004, with Cindy and Herschel Walker both trying to highlight the challenges of mental illness within families and couples and sharing their story, including some really rough parts, to help people. It wasn't an expose. It wasn't Cindy going on the air to talk about what a horrible person Herschel Walker was. It was her sitting beside her husband saying there was a point at which he held a gun to my head. And that's horrible to hear, and I'm sorry that it happened. But they obviously had come to a healing place enough with it to sit down and do a television interview together, and they still are, co-raising their children. So, yeah, I think it's a tough ad to watch, but I just think the hundreds of thousands of times it's aired, it's backfiring, particularly among African-American men who have had crosses with law enforcement and other organizations over the years that don't, that question their integrity based on 1 or 2 bad choices. Look at that and go, that could be me.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And also, I think that people are it's too much. Sometimes you can have too much money. Sometimes you can have too many negative ads. And I think that they started too soon and it's too much. Now, I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong about this. But I do think the better Brian Kemp does, the better Herschel Walker does.
I agree.
There are those split voters. There probably are some of those split voters out there, but I don't think they're as much as the Democrats are hoping for.
The only danger I see at this point for Governor Kemp, and it would be kind of the reverse of a Hail Mary, if there's a direct or indirect request by Donald Trump for his supporters, who still exist, and were about 25% of the GOP base in the primary, to stay home. He didn't do that directly during the Senate runoffs in 2020, but indirectly by not focusing on those runoffs and focusing on the rehashing, if you will, of the 2020 November election. 400,000 Republicans did sit out those runoffs, and it cost the Republican Party 2 Senate seats. And that's really the only danger I see for Brian Kemp between now and November the 8th.
Absolutely. Bill Crane, your columns are at Access WDUN. We look forward to reading them every week, and we appreciate you being with us today. Thanks, Bill.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Joining me right now is Tharon Johnson. Tharon Johnson is Democratic strategist. He's also my colleague on the Georgia Gang and my friend in life. So, Tharon Johnson, welcome to the program. How are you?
It's always good to be with you, Martha. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. So listen, we're having, a lot of challenges getting Democratic candidates on the program. We've talked to the state school superintendent. We talked to Jen Jordan early in the campaign. We've got requests out to everyone else. And, of course, we've had Senator Ossoff, who's not running, on a number of times. But we're going to keep trying. But we're going to let you stand in today for a lot of these candidates that we haven't heard from. What do you, first of all, give folks an overview of this Democratic ticket, and then let's talk a little bit more about it.
Well, Martha, I think you'll actually see more Democrats actually come on this show, which, yes, I mean, we know your audience primarily is a conservative group of listeners, but also I think that you've done a fantastic job of actually being fair to all candidates, and you really ask tough questions to Republicans. You ask tough questions to Democrats, and so I think you'll see a change in that very shortly. I think people have heard how reputable you are and how fair you are in your interviews. The reason I come on whenever I can and when you ask me to is because I think that as Democrats, we've got to make sure that we're very bold and specific about who we are. We are a big tent party that believes in a lot of things that most Georgians care about. Where we probably disagree with Republicans on most things is how do we pay for it and what's sort of the pathway to actually getting the legislation passed and how is it going to directly affect the state budget or the federal budget. But, look, we cannot win races in Georgia by only talking to our base. And I think all the Democratic candidates on the ticket statewide right now understand that. I think it's also important that, we take advantage of shows like this one. To have really open conversations and dialogue with a Republican like yourself, a conservative, who's not always just fell in line with the establishment. I mean, there have been many things that you and I have disagreed on, but there have been some things that we've actually agreed on. I've watched you and heard you stand up to folks in your own party about your beliefs. And so at a time where we know that Republicans right now in the state of Georgia are all but one race are polling ahead of the Democratic candidates. Senator Warnock is polling ahead of Herschel Walker. But if you go all the way down from the gubernatorial race down to all the people who are running, Republicans are leading in the current polling. And so there's a lot of ground to be made up for Democrats. And I think the way we do it is we, of course, motivate our base. We go to independent white men and college-educated, disaffected suburban white women and tell them how we can build this coalition to try to be victorious in November.
Yeah, and I think that it is about getting out. And look, you've got to do things to shore up your base, but it's getting kind of late for that, right? Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you shouldn't be having to shore up your base at this point in time. You should be reaching out to whatever the 7% undecided or the whatever the number is. And I think that, you've run a bunch of campaigns. At this point in the campaign, you should not be shoring up your base. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I think both sides are doing that, Martha. So let's talk about and you can confirm or deny what I think is going on the Republican side. From what I've heard, Governor Kemp is shoring up his base of Trump supporters, right? Many of whom who stayed at home in the last 2020 and 2021 election, right? Primarily because the former president encouraged him not to vote. And so when we say shoring up the base, I think that the governor is spending a lot of his time doing that because his governing posture has been, since he's been governor, trying to move more towards the middle. Now, he did go back towards his base and had to really kind of come out really strong on some conservative issues because he was running against former Senator David Perdue. So when I say shore up the base on the Democratic side, look, it's more about making sure they turn out. I think Democrats, when they vote, they're going to vote Democrat, right? Like most Republicans, 45+% of them are going to vote. So it's about, when we say shore up the base, making sure that the enthusiasm on our side is there. However, if you look at the ads, and I was on the flight, shout out to Delta, with Senator Warnock yesterday after our traveling to D.C., and if you look at their ads, I mean, Senator Warnock is talking about working across the aisle, how he's gotten ranked as one of the most one of the most bipartisan senators in the U.S. Senate. Stacey Abrams is saying, hey, I work with Nathan Deal and I work with Republicans to get things done. And so the paid advertisement, Martha, is definitely directed at shoring up the middle and the swing voters and the independents, right? But the other paid sort of ground game work, I think, is focusing on making sure that the enthusiasm is there for turnout.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned the enthusiasm factor, because, that's the big thing anyway. I mean, that's why we lost the 2 Senate seats in 2021, is because there was there was concern, enthusiasm, whatever you want to call it. They didn't get back out to vote. And so you can tie that to that. But the bigger thing that we've got to do, we got to get all our voters out. I think that both the Secretary of State's race and the governor's race is going to get some crossover votes, because all in all, Georgia's in a pretty good place economically. You're going to have some people that don't want to rock the boat, and that they're going to vote Republican, at least on Secretary of State and governor. There might be some split votes. I personally believe that Senator Warnock has gone a little too far. And again, I understand most of the negative advertising is not being paid for by him. But as you know, when you're dealing with super PACs, people don't understand all of that. We understand where the money comes from, but the average person thinks if it's an anti-Herschel Walker ad or if it's an anti-Raphael Warnock ad, that it's put out by the campaign. That's what the voter thinks. So I think he may have gone a little too negative for a guy that is Senator Reverend Warnock. But I do think that it's going to be close, and it's all going to depend on the governor's race, how the Senate race ends up.
Well, Martha, that's why, you and I, people think that sometimes when we are in the midst of campaigns, we're not people, right? We don't have compassion and we don't have a heart. And that's why you have done such a great job of not only being so respected within the Republican circles and working for governors and former U.S. senators, and even ran for office yourself for Congress, and been a long-time respected commentator on TV and now radio, is because, you're actually able to understand the emotion that goes into voting. And so while I respectfully disagree with you that Senator Warnock has gone too far, I do think that the negative advertisement that I've seen, and I've not seen everything, but I've probably seen the majority of it, is necessary, because most of it, and not all of it, are things that Herschel Walker has said. It's actually using his own words. It's using things that he has claimed to have done. And they're just highlighting that there's some discrepancies. There are some things that are not true. There are some things that just don't add up. And so I think that how the ad is produced, is it a little maybe kind of mean and dark? Probably, but it's not like the campaign or the outside organizations are making up information about a man who's running as a Republican nominee for U.S. Senate. But I think you'll see a switch, because he is a senator, he is a pastor, he is a man of the people, he being Senator Warnock. And I think you'll see the campaign shift in the next 5 weeks to really closing argument about why he is more qualified, why he's better to continue to work for all Georgians in the U.S. Senate.
And I'm really looking forward to the debate. I think that's the one debate.
Yeah, I think debate you'll see a good debate.
I think it's going to be a good debate. And as I pointed out on the gang this week, the challenge that Senator Warnock has is his expectations are high. And the benefit that Herschel Walker has is that they have low expectations of how he's going to do. So there's really more risk. I think initially there was more risk of Herschel Walker debating Raphael Warnock. I think Raphael Warnock, the senator, has more risk right now in this debate scenario, but it'll be fun to watch.
Well, I think Herschel, real quickly, has some risk too, Martha, because if you look at the polling that we're seeing, I've said this on the gang too, is that, look, he's clearly getting a little bit of a bump, because I believe most Republicans are saying, you know what, we're more concerned about Republican control in the U.S. Senate than we are who the person that's running. However, if he's getting this gang and he's sort of getting this little bit of a bump in the polls, does he run the risk of actually going on in the debate and not doing well at all and losing that momentum? So I think it's a risk for both candidates, but I do think that Senator Warnock will clearly shine, will do a great job. And you're right, Herschel has done a phenomenal job of saying that he's a country boy, and I guarantee you that Herschel Walker can buy more nice suits than Reverend Raphael Warnock, because we know he's done very well for himself with the millions and millions of dollars that he's made. And, you know, I don't like success shaming people. He definitely has worked hard to get that money. But, you know, he said he's going to get embarrassed. And so this is, whether it was intentional or strategic or not, he has definitely tried to lower the expectations for himself. But I think that the people of Georgia are going to be in for a treat, and I think they're going to see a clear distinction between these two gentlemen when they debate.
Tharon Johnson, thank you so much for being with me today, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Martha.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.